Okay, thank you, Wendy, and welcome everybody. Thanks for showing up. I think I should give you a little bit of background first, so I can talk about the real topic that I wanted to discuss with you. I started my career as an engineer, so I had a bachelor's and master's degree from RPI in New York, and worked for 3 great companies, really good companies, Procter & Gamble, Frito-Lay, and Nabisco brands, all doing industrial automation. So when I left Nabisco brands, I was director of automation for Nabisco in the United States. And that was the first time I lost my job, not of my own choosing. So when I left Procter & Gamble, I went to Frito-Lay to pick a management position, which P&G wasn't willing to give me, so the heck with them. And then I left Frito-Lay to go to Nabisco for a nice big promotion. You know, recessions happen, and recessions happened then, and I lost my job along with hundreds of thousands of others, and that was quite a shock to me. So what I did after that was recover from it. It started as somewhat of a setback, but I did recover and doing very different things. And those different things, while they didn't all seem like stuff I wanted to do at the time, they laid the groundwork for me for the best 18 years of my life. And if it had not been for those I don't want to do this, but I have to keep eating stuff, I wouldn't have been able to do what I had just finished doing. So I started by joining a consulting firm, and I wasn't looking to join a consulting firm. I joined them sort of by accident. I was out of work, and I was at one of these outplacement places, and they told me to always have a copy of my resume with me, no matter what, because you can never tell who you're going to meet. And I was at a funeral for a gentleman who had dropped dead, and I didn't really know him, but his wife knew my wife, so we were at this funeral, and I was in the back of the funeral parlor feeling a little uncomfortable, not knowing the dead guy. And there were 2 other guys back there who were kind of looked like they were in the same boat. So I asked them who they were, and they said, well, the gentleman who passed away was one of them. They belonged to a consulting firm. And that Monday, this was on a Friday, the funeral was, and that following Monday they were supposed to start a brand new project in western Pennsylvania, a few hours drive from where I was in Morris County, New Jersey. So I said, well, you know, it so happens I'm looking for work. Let me give you my resume, see if maybe I can help you. So we did. We ducked out of the funeral. We had a little interview there, and they hired me to take the dead guy's job on Monday. So that's probably the best networking story I've ever run across, and it happened to me. And he couldn't do it, so I wasn't hurting him. So for a year I worked for this consulting firm, and it taught me a lot about consulting, and also convinced me that I did not want to work for a consulting firm. So I spent some time with Rockwell Automation in sales. That was also a job I didn't want to do. I'd spent most of my engineering life avoiding salespeople, and getting an offer to go into sales just seemed bizarre to me. I turned them down several times before they convinced me that I didn't actually have to have I wasn't really selling. I would be sort of a consultant for the sales folks to help them sell to the kinds of people who I knew and understood. And so I was sort of an internal consultant, and that was good. And I learned a lot about the sales process and how it works, and I gained a lot of respect for sales by doing this, especially for technical sales. Then I ran part of a manufacturing company. I ran an engineering business, and the last sort of real job I had took me to Atlanta, where I live now, and where I was the president and CEO of the software company. And that was one of my life goals from very early on, right from being out of school, I wanted to run a company. And so there I was, at my goal, and it was interesting and it was fun, but 9/11 happened while I was there, and that was the end of that. Our little company folded, and I found myself out of work again this time in Atlanta, Georgia. And Atlanta was the city that I had already chosen as one of the 3 cities that I would like to live the rest of my life in, and fortunately, that's where I was. So for the next 18 years, I ran my own business, and I call it Value Train. I still run it, just not very much. And it's a business that started by accident. I belong to a lot of networking groups, and a number of folks wanted to get Six Sigma certifications because this was after 9/11. Jobs were in very, very short supply, and the availability of people was in very, very high supply. So it was pretty common that if a company was hiring someone and put out a job description, that 1,000 people would apply to it, and they couldn't handle that. They just couldn't. So that began the rise of the online job screening processes, and they would put in things that they needed and things that they wanted to see in resumes and had you fill out forms. And only 20 or 30 of those 1,000 resumes ever got to a human who was going to do the hiring, so they let these systems do the initial screening. And it was quite common at the time for a Six Sigma Green Belt or a Six Sigma Black Belt or a Lean certification to be on those screening things. And most of us who were in these groups knew all that material, but we didn't have the stamp on our forehead. And the courses that would give us that stamp were aimed at corporations, and they typically cost $4,000 to $8,000. And while this was a group of executives I was hanging out with, and we could have afforded that if we really wanted to, nobody who's out of work wants to spend that kind of money learning something that they already know just to get a piece of paper. So I volunteered. I thought it would be possible to build a class like that very inexpensively, and I found a professor who had just by accident been let go from his university, and he taught Six Sigma, and all of his material belonged to him, and the university licensed it. So when he left, he had all of his material, and he was capable of certifying. So I hired him to teach a class, and my first class was $200 a person. I just did everything as cheaply as I could and divided the number of people into the money I spent, and it came out to about $200, and they got their Six Sigma Green Belt instead of spending $8,000. So that was my community service for that couple of months. I then went back to job searching, but I couldn't do it because my phone would not stop ringing from people who wanted me to do that for them. I said, no, this was a one-shot deal. So I finally gave up and decided I'll do it once a month. But I've already accomplished my initial goal, so I raised the price a little bit so I'd make a little money, and I started doing it monthly. And after a while, I realized that I had in my hands the beginnings of what could be a company. So I couldn't make a living by selling cheap Six Sigma courses in Atlanta, but I could by selling not quite so cheap, but still low-priced process improvement courses all over the country. And that's what I did. And for 18 years I did that, organizing public courses in various cities. That evolved into corporate training. So after a while, most of my training became corporate. Companies would hire me, and I'd come in and do the class for them. I started doing consulting services for Lean or Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma projects. And most of my consulting came from my graduates. So during that time, I trained over 3,000 graduates, which is quite a lot. And I worked from home. A lot of people don't like the idea of working from home, but I found it relaxing. I could do what I wanted to do, and it worked out great. So why today's talk? Today's talk is because after 18 years of doing essentially the same thing, I can get bored pretty easily, and I started to get bored doing that. But the part that I loved was the advanced statistics that I taught in the Black Belt course. And at the time, data science and data analytics was just a screaming hot field and growing like mad, and the